there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Flight Box. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me here to talk about Peacemaker, Season 2, Episode 7. Oh, the penultimate episode. That's right. The episode just before the season finale, and maybe the series finale? Hey, there's speculation about that. People have got some theories and some stuff that they're talking about with respect to how this particular end is potentially happening for Peacemaker Season 2, combined with what we saw in this episode and also some things that we've heard speculated potentially from James Gunn's words, if you will, because any and everything James Gunn says at this point is going to be speculated upon and, assumptions made, if you will. But before diving headfirst into my thoughts on this week's episode, I want to remind everybody that this show, Flightbox, and my other shows can all be found at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it is Apple Podcast, whether it is the Flightcast YouTube channel, whether it is Spotify, whether it is Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find this show, you can find the main show, Flightcast, you can find Flight Review, my movie review show, which pretty sure I'm going to go see Tron Ares. Yeah, more than likely that's going to happen. I'm going to see Tron Ares. And yeah, there will have to be a separation of the art and the artist conversation with respect to that one because of thoughts about Jared Leto and whatnot, but still want to see the film, still will see the film, and probably will do a flight review for that, among other things as well. And of course, Flight Chat, the listener feedback show, where all of you send in your emails and your feedback, and we have a grand old time talking about movies, TV, and other sort of media with respect to the weekend, if you will. But those shows can be found again at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, I want to take a moment to thank everybody, all the very loyal and faithful supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. Yes, my little bit of a break that I had this week, had a really busy week with respect to just getting things organized in another project that I've been working on for the Flightcast, if you will, which is, stay tuned for that. That's yet to be debuted. But had a little bit of a break with respect to content. But there is still almost, if not close to 200 pieces of content available, bonus episodes of Flight Box, Flight Review, Flight Report, my comic review show, because at some point I'm going to read comics again. All that and other things are available at patreon.com/theflightcast. If you sign up to be a flight officer, you get access to all of it. If you're a flight crew member, you will at the very least get access to episodes of Flight Speed and Friday Flight with respect to Patreon. But thank you so much to those of you who have subscribed to it. And as always, cannot thank you enough for your support to the Flightcast Patreon network. All right, about this week's episode of Peacemaker, the penultimate episode of Season 2, Episode 7, Like a Keith in the Night. Let's just get this out of the way first. Wasn't as good as last week's episode. Subjectively speaking, no. However, if somebody wants to make the argument that they like this week's episode better than last week's, I completely understand why, because this week's episode was still really good. But here's the deal. I posted the day that I watched this episode, and mind you, I've been doing a bit of a social media blackout for the last couple of Fridays. That's been my strategy, basically, is to, the night before I go to bed, night before the Peacemaker episode, actually really the night the Peacemaker episode drops, because it drops on Thursdays at the equivalent of 9 o'clock at night for me, and I have to go to bed because I have to go to work in the morning, right? So that means I have to go an entire day, right? Basically from 4 a.m. to noon before I even have a chance. I won't get a chance to watch Peacemaker until between 1 to 2 p.m. in the afternoon at the earliest, right? On the following Friday, if you will. And yeah, there's no way that I'm going to let Threads or anybody else spoil me on whatever the details are. So I turn my notifications for Threads and Reddit and whatnot off the night before, and I stay off of social media the entire time. And man, has it been so peaceful. Seriously, the last 2 Fridays have been just incredibly peaceful. Not just without spoilers, but just without general noise and chaos and panic from social media in general, because that's all the algorithms want us to do, is be fearful and panic and angered and all manner of stupefied, if you will. But at any rate, when I finally watched the episode yesterday, I did post about it, and I'm going to read exactly what I posted and reactions to it. I said I've been watching James Gunn's comic book universe work for over a decade now, because it's true. First Guardians of the Galaxy film came out in 2014. So yeah, over a decade, 11 years at this point. And I said, I should have known that's where he was going with Peacemaker this week, instead of letting my fandom brain expectations take over again. And I said I would elaborate further, which I will in this episode. But I want to point out what Anthony said. Because Anthony, if you're listening, this is where I will bring up the miscommunication, or I guess the misinterpretation. It wasn't really a miscommunication because I didn't say anything wrong. But he responded to my post and he said, yeah, I don't know why you and others kept saying there was going to be a bunch of big cameos. He just said that the last three were very different from the first five, and that's true. And I wasn't talking about the cameos when I said it. And there was still a big cameo that was revealed in this episode. Sidney Happerson, the Lexus tech from the Superman, the one that helped him open the portal in the first place. And Ben Everett's at Real Anarchy, whether he knew this, like he may have read this, because he reads a lot of the inside baseball and a lot of the spoiler stuff, a lot of the scooper stuff, if you will, right? He may have already known this, but whether he did or not, he called that was who it was going to be. And he was right. He was 100% right. He absolutely called that one. And I remember me and William said, William was the one that said it even more so that it would be disappointing if it was just Sidney Happerson. I'm not disappointed in it all. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And it also clues into another part of Gunn's machinations in terms of how he puts stuff together and what he uses cameos and appearances for. But to me, I wasn't talking about the cameos. And I also didn't say that I was disappointed. And that's where Anthony, like he basically was looking, and I get it, the way that I worded it, especially when I said that, letting my fandom brain expectations take over, he assumed that I was disappointed. And he said, I'm sorry, you and others set themselves up for disappointment. Sure, something else could still happen, but I think we already saw how the show sets up Man of Tomorrow with the two cameos we got. Even though it wasn't Superman or G.I. Robot or whoever, he's telling a good story, and that's what really matters. He says, my main disappointment with this season is how short the episodes are and how little action there's been, but the character development makes up for that. Well, I truthfully haven't had any disappointments with this season, nothing to that effect. And talking about how short the episodes are and how little action there's been, that doesn't bother me. Because, and really this week, this particular episode is the reason, I would say, as to why it doesn't bother me, because there's intention there. And let's go back to the previous thing that you said there, Anthony. You said that he's telling a good story and that's what really matters. Well, I know that. And anybody else that is disappointed, anybody that is actually disappointed in this season, should refer back to that. Because if the complaints are, and I imagine people that are actually disappointed in this season, it probably does have to do with the shortness of the episodes, because there's been consistent complaints about that. So much to the point that Gunn had to flat out tell everybody on Threads that they'll be delighted to know that the season finale is 57 minutes long. So, Anthony, in case you didn't see that, 57 minutes long. The season finale is going to be nearly an hour long. And maybe that's a little consolation to you, because the episodes to this point have been, 35 to 37 minutes long. And for me, my whole position on runtime with television and also with movies has really, evolved over the years. It used to be I had a minimum, okay, you got to be at least this long for a movie, at least this long for a TV episode. And now, to me, it's really just about how do you use the time that you have. You don't always need an hour. I mean, there are plenty of episodes of Game of Thrones and other shows that are 50 minutes long, and they're very dense, and they have a lot of stuff going on, and it's okay, that's a lot. And then you want me to remember 10 episodes of this for 9 months going into the next season. Game of Thrones was one of those shows that I always needed a damn refresher on, because so much happened. Those episodes were so damned long. And while everybody else was enjoying themselves, I'm sitting there this is too much shit for me to remember. I don't like that, personally. But that's my own subjective complaint. So I don't need episodes of every show to be at least 50 minutes long. And I don't need there to be 10 or more. I don't. There can be 8. 8 is perfectly fine with me, which is what Peacemaker is going to be. Use whatever time you have to the best of your ability. It's about how you use that time. And I think James Gunn has masterfully used this particular time, because what this week's episode, Like a Keith in the Night, tells us that, maybe people already knew, and what I should have remembered, is that first and foremost, James Gunn does tell character stories. Character development is a big deal for him. That is the type of creative that he is. And his stories, whatever they are, whether it's Guardians of the Galaxy, whether it's Superman, whether it's Peacemaker, anything involved with a shared cinematic comic book universe, they're always going to involve character development, and they're always going to involve a level of heart. I've seen people on social media, on Threads, talk about how Jennifer Holland deserves an Emmy for her emotional work in last week's episode, and now I'm seeing the same people say that John Cena deserves an Emmy for this week's episode. Now, of course, neither of that is going to happen. But when we talk about the acting performances of those two with respect to these last 2 episodes, yeah, I'm not going to argue with anybody that says that. John Cena, at this point, I said that I definitely, with respect to wrestler turned actors, definitely put him ahead of The Rock now. Is he quite on Dave Bautista's level? Maybe not yet, but he's getting there. He is getting there, especially with this particular episode, because I'll tell you what, getting back to the thing I said about fandom brain, it didn't have anything to do with disappointment. It's just that all the discussions that we fans have about what could potentially happen and what setups could be and what cameos could be and what breadcrumbs could be laid down. Like, fans are constantly thinking. We're always like a mile a minute. We're like, okay, what about this? What about that? Because we have a wealth of source material to draw upon, and not only that, we have hopes and dreams and things that we really want to see play out in live action that fly through our heads on a regular basis. And we are still in the early stages of the DCU, right? We're only one animated series, one feature film, and now almost a full season of television into the beginning of the DCU. And we're still trying to, glean all information that we can and all sources and all clues and whatever to say, okay, this is where we think the franchise is going. This is where we think the story is headed, right? And so that's what we do, right? And we do this for all these franchises, right? And going back to the whole disappointment thing, anybody that set themselves up for disappointment with cameos, first thing that I think of is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And under no circumstances, one, was I disappointed in that movie, but two, no way in hell would I allow myself to get disappointed on that level. And for people that don't remember or for people that are unaware, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness had a bevy of expectations from fans, right? And fortunately, the movie still made $955 million in May of 2022, despite the weight of the fan expectations. You had people claiming and believing that we were going to get Tom Cruise as variant Tony Stark in the multiverse. That was just one of a litany of things that we heard were going to be the case, that people speculated we were going to see as far as major, massive cameos in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And anybody that was wildly disappointed in that movie because they didn't see that level of cameos, that's on them. That's absolutely on them. And that is certainly never a level of disappointment that I would ever reach with Peacemaker. Now, look, I've told you flat out the two cameos that I, had my fingers crossed. One that I was certain was going to happen, and now I'm not 100%, but if it's going to happen now, obviously it's going to happen in the season finale, and that's David Corenswet as Superman. Yes, James Gunn has said no, he didn't fit, and that Corenswet allegedly was not happy that he couldn't be in the season because Nicholas Hoult was in the season because he was Lex last week. But to me, it just goes back to that set picture that Corenswet took with Danielle Brooks, the actress who plays Adebayo. The fact that he was in Superman garb, right? And I know that they were shooting at the same set. So yeah, they could have taken a break, like in between shooting Peacemaker Season 2 and Superman. And yes, maybe that's why he was in costume, and maybe that's what it was. I'm more inclined to believe that either we're going to see Corenswet and Gunn is lying, for the sake of PR, or they did shoot something for Superman in the season finale, and he removed it. I'm almost more inclined to believe the latter if we don't see Superman in the season finale next week. Now, if we don't see him in the season finale, I'm still not disappointed. It's still not that big of a deal. He's been referenced, and the events of the movie have been referenced enough that connective tissue is most certainly there. I'm not worried about that whatsoever, and I'm definitely not disappointed. And with respect to cameo disappointment, I mean, there's still room for cameos, right? There's still room for my Dark Horse cameo. My Dark Horse cameo idea still very much could happen. But as I said before, if it doesn't happen, I'm not upset, and I'm certainly not disappointed. The character work that was done in this week's episode was absolutely top-notch. And that's what happened here. Fandom brain, when we get our expectations high, and when our imaginations run wild, as they often do as fans, we think of the whole world building, right? We think of everything. We think of epic. We think of grandiose. We think of massive spectacle. And that's what any of us have been thinking. That's what a lot of us, rather, have been thinking with respect to the future of the DCU. How is Peacemaker going to impact the whole of the DCU? Not just the Peacemaker storyline, not just Christopher Smith and what he's been going through this season, but what is going to happen for the future of the DCU. So when Lex gets involved, and when all the dimensional stuff gets involved, we don't think of the individual Peacemaker story. We forget a lot of times that the title of the show is Peacemaker, not DCU or, something broader ranging. It's a Peacemaker show. This show is supposed to be about John Cena's character. It's supposed to be about Christopher Smith. It's supposed to be about what he is going through as a person, as a character. And so for all the people that are like, why, who would ask for a Peacemaker show? Well, it's compelling television, to be honest with you. And it's compelling writing and it's compelling storytelling. And I'll go back to what Chris Belga said a week or so ago on Vodka Stream when he talked about how dark was it going to get for Chris, because now he was going to be put into a situation now that this is Nazi Earth, now that this is essentially Earth X, which, by the way, the glass shattering on that and realizing that he didn't see copies of Mein Kampf on everybody's desk or a giant mural to Hitler. Yes, that was funny, but it also just further gave you a glimpse into how we were seeing that world from his perspective. And he was so jaded, he was so blinded, he was so like colored by what was going on in his own life and his own perspective as a white man, that no, he didn't see all of the Nazi paraphernalia that was all over that place that we just didn't see because it was out of focus or it was on a different wall that the camera wasn't looking at, right? We saw everything from Chris's eyes as far as that world was concerned, right? And Chris Balga was like, what's going to happen when he's got to witness the death of his father and his brother again and probably kill them again, in order to save his friends from Earth X? Well, Chris, I'll give you credit. They went dark, but they went even darker than that. Because this wasn't a situation where Chris had to kill, for the sake of it. Because at least, like, it would have been gut-wrenching if he had to kill Augie and if he had to kill Keith, his father and brother. But at least if they were Nazis, if it was a self-preservation angle and if they were like, you're no son of mine, you're no brother of mine, right? And it was a matter of life and death and self-defense, just like when he, killed his other version, right, of himself in the first episode. Like, at least there would have been that self-defense angle. This was worse. This was far more gut-wrenching. This was far more heartbreaking. Because, and again, the fandom brain had me thinking, Adebayo is going to get caught. She's going to be in a concentration camp with, flippin' judo master, and now the vigilantes are going to have to go and rescue them, and it's going to be a big, huge thing. No, it was far more personal than that. First of all, Adebayo didn't get captured. She had the mob, the full racist white Nazi mob, chased her into a pool, and I also didn't quite understand why she jumped into the pool. It's like, it's a pool. I mean, okay, do you think that's going to slow people down? They're just going to run to the other side of the pool. But no, it worked out because they all jumped into the water, and maybe she saw Judo Master there beforehand, but Judo Master pops up out of the woods with, electrical wire to electrocute all the Nazis that jump into the pool after her, after she gets out of it. And then they escape, and they go hole up in a mansion and basically chill until it gets nightfall. They play Scrabble and basically have a heart-to-heart conversation about what's going on with them, right? And that was the part of the episode where I will admit, when I got to that part of the episode, I'm like, okay, this is kind of dragging a bit. Like, why are we focusing on this? And that's where it was like, okay, I still hadn't gotten it. I still hadn't realized exactly what this episode was and how character-driven this episode was. Those bits are important because, again, this is about the 11th Street Kids. It's about everybody involved with Peacemaker and what they're going through. And, you've got that conversation going on. You've got the two vigilantes figuring out what they're going to do. And that conversation, which a lot of people have highlighted, especially the part where, the vigilante of Earth X discovers that the Americans won the war, and he's like, oh, you must be living in a utopia. And real vigilante goes, yeah, that hit home. That absolutely hit home. And there was also the line from Adebayo to Judo Master about how, the world that we live in isn't so different, isn't as different from this world as we like it to be, as we like to think that it is. And Judo Master agreeing with that. And there was some real world, fourth wall breaking, winks at the camera, not exactly winks, but like subtlety, right, with respect to the language used and how it was written, was like, yeah, we know exactly, what they're getting at here. And it's interesting because, I mean, obviously James Gunn has already been through, that Fox News already called Superman super woke when they found out that, about the immigrant storylines and the stuff with I don't even know, truthfully, if they've gotten to the whole allegory with Baravia and Jarhanpur and all that. Yeah, I don't know. I think they really just called it super woke because of James Gunn calling him the ultimate immigrant. Right? I think that was really where it came from. And with Peacemaker, I guess some of them have started complaining about Peacemaker as well, but either way, like, it's interesting how the politics of James Gunn, he manages to get the message out there and tell the story, but not necessarily be after school special with it, not so after school special with it, but does make it obvious. Yeah, this is what this is about. Yeah, this is what's going on here, right? Yeah, this is what this world is like in that regard. And whether or not that message is lost among much of the audience, it's still there, right, in that regard. And it's just a part of how he's operated. It's part of the stories that he's told. Like, there's realism there, there's relatability within the characters that say that, right? Because any one of us would envision going into another dimension and finding a world that is better than the one that we currently live in, and then discovering, oh no, it's actually worse. Oh my goodness, how would our thought processes, how would our psyche be shattered? And look, to Chris Smith's credit, he didn't hesitate. As soon as it was clear that they were in Nazi world, right? Earth X, essentially, he and Harcourt got the hell out of Argus. And I mean, basically blasted their way and fought their way out, very physically, very violently, got out of Dodge, got on the peace cycle, and pieced out in that regard, right? But here's where it gets heart-wrenching. Here's where it gets gut-wrenching, right? Because, Adebayo and Judah Master, we never see concentration camps. We never see where all of the minorities, and we're told this, right? Vigilante tells us, yeah, they're all, like, in camps. They're all forced to toil and labor because the Nazis won World War II in this reality. Okay, but we're left to our own devices to imagine that, right? So, again, the fandom brain that expected we were going to see that in this particular episode, no, most certainly not. And why? Because James Gunn is keeping this story to his characters, his main characters. He's keeping this centered around Peacemaker, and he's keeping it close to the chest with the 11th Street Kids, right? Like, we're not going any further than that. We're not reaching any massive implications going forward, right? Now, we're going to see some world building stuff more than likely in the season finale. But as far as this particular story and what's going to end up here, no, this has all got to get sewn up to lead into what that last episode is going to be, right? So this gets even more gut-wrenching because in the middle of the cops surrounding Harcourt and Chris, and by the way, there was that little moment where, they're on the cycle and Harcourt lets her guard down because she's on the cycle, and she gives Chris that extra hug and places her head on his shoulder, and he's having the moment with her that he had with Thirst Court in the earlier episode, right? Like, and this is where it's like, okay, now this one feels better, this one feels right, this one feels stronger. This is where the non-verbal acting from both John Cena and Jennifer Holland really is on point, with the music playing in the background, because, like, he's the hero to her in this regard, right? And they are saving each other, but at the by the same token, they're riding off into the sunset, if you will. And then when they get surrounded by the cops and they're not sure how they're going to get out of it, that's when Augie and Keith, after Augie, and which, by the way, has had Economos tied up at this point, Augie confronts Keith, and he made this one comment. He talked about how, he knew about the dimensional portal. He talked about how he saw another version of him in there, that he felt like he came from a darker place than their world. And at the moment, I was like, wait a minute. What does that mean? He thinks that the other Augie came from a darker place. And then that just ends up making what ends up happening at the end of this episode even more heartbreaking. Because Augie and Keith save Chris and Harcourt from the cops. And, the iteration of, if you want to live, come with me, right? You come with me if you want to live. Yeah, that wasn't lost on me either, guys. The whole Terminator 2 flip, right? Robert Patrick, of course, the T-1000. Historically, that is where most of us first saw him in life, right? Especially those of us millennials and elder millennials. It's the first thing we ever knew Robert Patrick from, right? And now to see him basically return that line, if you will, in this setting. But you're sitting there the whole time like, okay, why are Augie and Keith willing to save them? And then they get into that conversation at the house. And this is a really good conversation. It's a really telling part of the conversation. And this is when you realize, this is when Augie tells you, oh, he's not a Nazi. He's actually a good person. He's just, he's anti what this world stands for, but he doesn't feel like there's much that he can do about it. And Harcourt does actually call him out for this, and says, you're not doing a whole lot of good, essentially paraphrasing what you said. And he says something to the effect of, do you live in a perfect world and fight every injustice that you see? Well, good for you. Like, he basically saying he doesn't have the room or the ability to do that. He does what he can because he can fight the monsters that he can control in that regard. But he has no interest in seeing Adebayo dealt with. He has no interest in seeing anyone persecuted. He does not agree with the ways of his Nazi-led world. He actually believes in, the goodness of people. And he still believes in the goodness of Chris, right? Chris admits to him and Keith that he accidentally killed their Peacemaker. And Keith's pissed. Keith is like, okay, no, we got to take this dude out because he killed my brother. And Augie's like, well, listen, Keith, your brother was an asshole. And he was drug-addled and he lost control. He wasn't that great of a person. And I believe this, Chris, when he says it was an accident, which, as we know, of course, being the audience, we know that it was an accident. We know that he didn't maliciously kill that other Peacemaker. We know it was self-defense. The way that he described the murder, if you will, the way that he described the killing to Augie and Keith is precisely how it played out. So Keith is ready to pull the trigger and take Chris out, but Augie is like, no, I still buy it. I buy what he's saying. We're going to help them. We're going to help all of his friends, including the black woman, get back to their dimension, and then I'm going to change the damn code on that thing so that this can't happen again. So Augie is good, right? And I know that I've seen this on threads. I've seen that this whole purity conversation, people talking about, let's not act like Augie was all of a sudden a hero, because it's not like he did a whole lot as the White Dragon. He could have joined the Sons of Liberty. He could have done this and that. And look, here's the thing. Applying real life purity tests, which already hold things back in real life, to a TV series, it just makes it even worse. Just makes it even more ridiculous. It's very clear that in this particular Earth, Augie is not a Nazi. It's very clear he's not a Nazi. Now, if you want to have semantical arguments about he could have done more and he should have been parts of the Sons of Liberty, I guess you can have that discussion. But again, that's not what the damn story is about. The story is about how it affects Chris when he gets stabbed in the neck by Vigilante coming through the window, right? Chris is at this point where this entire season, he's found this world that he thought was perfect. And now he realizes that it's not perfect. But he even told Augie and Keith, I just wanted to see what having a family was like. And even in the midst of all the Nazi shit, even in the midst of finding out that the Nazis won World War II in this earth and how horrible it is for other people, his family is still his family, right? Augie and Keith were still not Nazis. They were still trying to fight the good fight, even though they were powerless, essentially, to do so in their world and in their perspective, right? And look, you want to argue about perspectives on that, okay. But the fact of the matter is, Augie made it very clear multiple times to Keith, hey, you know what we're trying to do here? We know what we're trying to build, this type of thing. Basically saying, we're not Nazis. We're not evil. We're not doing this, right? So even in the midst of all the Nazi shit, Chris is still standing there with a brother and a father who love him, or at least love a version of him, and are still good in this horrible world. And then they get taken out. Augie, the good Augie, gets taken out. And I saw somebody else posit this, right? Because they went back a couple of episodes and talked about how Chris made that comment about how he, because of the fate of the universe, he got thrown under the wrong Earth, where the bad Peacemaker should have gone to their Earth, and he should have gone to the good one, right? And that type of deal. And then somebody say, well, what if that was what happened with Augie, right? Because think about what Augie said earlier. Augie told Keith that when he went through the dimensional door, he saw a version of himself from the other Earth that looked like he came from a darker place. He saw the racist Augie. He saw the KKK Augie. He saw the White Dragon Augie from our Earth, right? And he thought that Earth was worse than ours. That's another piece of social commentary from James Gunn. Dude from Nazi Earth sees KKK racist version of himself from our Earth and automatically believes that our Earth is worse than his. Chew on that for a second. Chew on that message for a bit. Because that's something that not even Fox News is intelligent enough to figure out. But chew on that particular message for just a second there, right? Augie on racist Nazi Earth X, who actually isn't a racist himself, sees racist Augie, KKK Augie, from our Earth and deduces that our Earth is worse. Crazy, huh? Absolutely mind-bending. And of course, he dies. He gets stabbed in the neck. And you're just sitting there and you see it coming as Augie. You're like, no! At least that's how I felt. That's how I felt, right? Like, oh, this is terrible. No, this shouldn't be happening. Wait a minute. A couple of years ago in season 1, I wanted Augie dead, and now I'm pissed that he's dead. Now I'm not happy. Now I'm sad that this particular Augie is dead, because this one didn't deserve to die. The KKK White Dragon one did deserve to die, did deserve to get shot in the head by Chris. This one doesn't deserve to die. Damn it. This isn't fair. There's nothing fair about this whatsoever. And that type of, like, emotions, they build up into the penultimate scene, the caterwaul, if you will. And the director of this week's particular episode talked about this on Threads. Alethea Jones, who directed some previous episodes for this particular season, she was responding to a post that James Gunn responded to. At first, this started with Joshua Chennault, which I feel like have I talked to this dude before? I've seen him before. I've either seen him before or has he been on Vodka Stream? I don't know. I have no idea. But this dude is a big DCU fan, or at least he's enjoying the DCU to this point. And he said John Cena deserves an Emmy nomination for this season, if I'm being honest. And Gunn quoted him and said, "I don't disagree with you. One of the cool things with this show is watching along with the rest of you as an audience member. Because it's been months since I worked on the episodes, I'm able to see them more, well, sort of objectively." He put in parentheses, "I'm able to enjoy them as shows and not just as work," which I'm glad he qualified that that's what he meant by objectively, because as you know, objectivity, not possible. But he identified what he meant by objectively, and that definition I understand. He's not saying that he can look at them objectively. He's saying that he can see them as shows and not just as work, because beforehand he was looking at them as work, and it's a lot more colder and a lot less emotional, if you will. He said, "And John Cena's performance tonight blew me away," referring to this episode. And so that's when Alethea Jones, who directed this particular episode, quoted him and said, "I remember James Gunn asked us to play with the idea of a caterwaul for the deepest emotional point of episode 7. John Cena and I didn't know what a caterwaul was before that, but we sure found out. John did not disappoint." Now, for those of you who don't know what a caterwaul is, it is officially defined by Oxford dictionaries as a shrill howling or wailing noise, right? Or to make a shrill howling or wailing noise like that of a cat, right? A caterwaul is a noun and a verb in that regard. And I think we can agree on some level that that's precisely what Chris does, right? When he just starts screaming because they are beating the shit out of Chris, or out of Keith rather, and when he just starts screaming, like, "Get off of him, what the F is wrong with us?" And that whole point right there, that's when it hit me. That's when I got it. That's when I remembered what James Gunn does. That's when I realized what this episode actually was. This is all about Chris. This is all about his emotional arc. And this is worse than him having to kill Augie himself or having to kill Keith himself. This is far, far worse. Because at least, again, in those scenarios where he had to kill them again, he's killing evil versions of his brother and father. Just as he doesn't know if his brother would have been evil in his world, but he knows that his father was, right? He would have at least had that to fall back on. But in this case, no. He doesn't have that to fall back on. And now he's just seeing people that he cares about die, on his watch, if you will. And the flashbacks that were thrown in here made it even more effective, right? Witnessing his younger brother Keith's death again, him shooting Augie in the head again, the bad Augie, right? And then, of course, Rick Flag, right? The death of Rick Flag. And when he literally says that there's nothing wrong with either world, the problem is with him, right? Like, he's the one, everyone dies around him when he comes to that realization. And you see that turn, especially with what he says in the promo for next week's episode. That's when you see, like, the most powerful, like the most gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, emotional acting from John Cena in this particular role. And that's where I realized, okay, yeah, this is that heart. This is that character work that we're talking about here. This is what James Gunn does. This is how he writes his stories. This is how he crafts his characters. You're going to feel something. You are. If you have a heart, if you have any type of emotion, you're going to feel something. Even for characters that you thought were throwaway, characters that you thought, hey, why in the hell are they making a show about this dude? And, a character like Augie, who was a horrible racist and a terrible bigot and a horrific father in season 1, and then this version of him that you're all convinced, hey, he's a Nazi anyway, and then you find out, no, he's not, and he still dies, right? All of that, and just the weight of all that on Chris and how it affects him, and just his whole caterwaul, if you will, at everyone else, just his freak out before they finally leave Earth X, is just, that's the most powerful moment in this entire episode, and it is quite possibly John Cena's finest hour as far as acting in that regard. It really is. It really is, and he deserves all manner of marks. I mean, he has really embraced this character. He's really sunk his teeth into this character, and it is crazy to think. None of us, I think, would have thought this coming out of the Suicide Squad, right? And I give that movie full marks. I enjoy that movie. I recently watched it again, a couple weeks ago. Did a whole episode of Saturday Soliloquy on Flightcast of Patreon.com/the Flightcast rather, to talk about it again and about how it's really a DCU movie. And none of us thought that this particular character would get this much emotional depth and this much complexity, this much character development from that point on. But really, he has, right? If you go back to there, from his appearance in that film all the way through season 1 of Peacemaker and now through to this point in season 2 of Peacemaker, it's an incredible piece of work, seriously, that both James Gunn and John Cena have put together here for this character, a character that none of us would have thought would have gotten, an appearance in a movie, let alone a TV series, and he's had both. It's crazy to think of how much they've put into this character and how well they've crafted it up to this point. And so that's where the expectations really should have remained with respect to this season, right? None of the bigger overarching stuff, right? None of the concentration camps and the big DCU building stuff that we thought we were going to see with Earth X and its impact, right? And even talking about, well, what happens if I was even thinking of like on Crisis on Earth X levels, like what if they come over to this universe? Which, listen, that could still happen, just not maybe in full force of an army, right? They're going to stay on their Earth, but Keith might cross over. Because I'll tell you, another scene in this episode that was really telling for me. And again, this is another moment from Jennifer Holland, another moment from her Harcourt, where she lets her guard down and her real emotions pop off, right? Just as they're leaving, she points the gun at Keith's head and literally says, "Sorry, but I can't have you coming after him." "Oh, really, Harcourt? You can't have Keith coming after him. Why?" "Because you care about him. Because you actually do have feelings for him. And now you're reaching a point where you're less and less fearful of showing it. You were literally this close. If it weren't for the cops and whatnot, breaking things up and knocking you off target, you were this close to shooting his other brother in the head because you could not have him coming after him," which is a possibility. And yeah, it does really feel like that's going to happen on some level. Like the door has been left wide open for Keith to cross over into the other Earth because Augie's dead, which means the code isn't going to change. That door is still going to be open for him to come through. And whether he does or not, Keith is alive. Keith is in that ambulance. Keith is there, right? Now, what's he thinking? What's going through his head? I know a lot of people are assuming vengeance. He wants vengeance. And I even saw somebody, in fact, it was even the Joshua Channel person that started the whole thread that I mentioned earlier, where Gunn responded and then Alethea Jones responded. He even posted, like, the DCU is going to have real problems with these two when they get to the real Earth. And he posted both Keith from Earth X and Ultraman, right? Because, there are plenty of people that are speculating that Ultraman, obviously did not die or get crushed in that black hole. And he's going to find his way back to Earth as Bizarro, which that's possible. Sure, that's why wouldn't that be possible? The groundwork has essentially already been laid for that in terms of how he was created and in terms of what he could return as. There's no question. He could most certainly come back as Bizarro. Now, whether or not James Gunn wishes to do that, I don't know. But this does go into what I was talking about earlier with respect to cameos, in the sense that it's clear that James Gunn does not do cameos for the sake of doing cameos necessarily. He does cameos for the sake of intertwining and interconnecting things. And before somebody goes, "Well, wait a minute, Ray, how come he put the Justice League at the end of season 1 of Peacemaker?" Well, because he was trying to connect it to the overarching DCEU, because at the time the DCU didn't exist and he and Safran didn't even have a deal to build the DCU yet. He might have been thinking about it in principle. But he put a scene in and put a joke throughout the season connecting it to the overarching DCEU at the time. But it's easily changed, as he's already changed it in that regard. So to me, it just tells me that he believes in doing homework and he believes in connectivity. And he also doesn't believe in using characters frivolously, right? So, like people, I remember the question, Michael Ian Black's character in Superman, basically the Bill O'Reilly or the Sean Handy, whoever it is, that hosted the anti-Superman talk show that Lex Luthor was on all the time, right? What was his name again? Clevis Thornweight. Yes, a character that he created for the movie, right? People asked him, why didn't you use Jack Ryder? Or why didn't you use Gordon Godfrey, right? And James Gunn, and I've talked about this before in Flightcast. James Gunn basically gave an answer to the effect of those characters wouldn't have fit the story, right? Like he's not going to use Jack Ryder or G. Gordon Godfrey unless it's going to serve the story that he's telling. And neither of those characters served the story that he was telling in Superman. It was better for him to create Clevis Thornweight in that regard. So if that's how he's regarding, and I said this at the time, I said, listen, if that's how he's going to regard these characters, then we can be certain, that these characters, these stable of characters for DC are in safe hands with him at the helm, because he's not going to use them frivolously. And he's not necessarily going to tease things that aren't going to come to fruition or have some meaning down the road in that regard, right? So the fact that he's left Keith alive on Earth X really does suggest, the door is open for that. The fact that we didn't see a body with Ultraman, right? Unless he comes out and says, no, Ultraman's dead, that door is open for something like that, right? And it just tells you that, when it comes to the cameo that did happen in this episode, Sidney Happerson, which I love. Sidney Happerson is such a deep pull for like a DC Comics character. And to me, I love his existence in the DCU because it further cements James Gunn's homework that he does for all of these particular projects and how much of the DC Comics universe he is aware of, right? Like he brought in hypnoglasses, like he made hypnoglasses canon for the first time cinematically in any Superman, in history. Hypnoglasses were never canon with Reeve, they were never canon with Cavill, and they weren't canon with Routh or anybody else. They're canon now in this DCU with Cornswet, which is awesome. And so is Sidney Happerson, right? All this time we've grown up knowing about Mercy Graves, we've grown up knowing about Otis, we've grown up knowing about Eve Tessmacher. Did any of us know about Sidney Happerson with the big glasses and the black and the Mo Howard haircut? No, we didn't. We didn't know about that, but that's a deep comics pull. Superman Volume 2, Issue 2, February 1987. Oh, wow. That's when Rachel was born. That's awesome. February 1987, written by John Byrne, right? Like, but this is a character from Lex Luthor's entourage that I don't think most of us were aware of it. Some of you, okay, Jared and Scott, perhaps you guys knew. I didn't. I most certainly did not know in that regard, right? I knew Otis, right, and I knew Eve, like that. Those characters I knew. Had no idea about the Sidney Happerson character, and yeah. The whole fact that he just went ahead and located where the portal was for Rick Flag Sr. and then had a smile on his face at the end, it's like, yeah, this isn't good. This is not good at all. This is setting up some type of secret whatever for Lex. This is not good whatsoever. And what the whole motivation, he's like, why should I help you? Well, you wouldn't want to disappoint Lex, would you? No, there's something else nefarious going on here, and that definitely is that's the part of the episode that is starting to lean towards what we're going to see in Man of Tomorrow. And of course, this episode ends with Argus arresting everyone, the 11th Street kids, and certainly Peacemaker, right? Really arresting Peacemaker and taking him into custody. And at this point, he's given up. He is ready to just throw in the towel. Like he told all of them, he told everyone at Argus, they found where I was and came to convince me to give this device to you. Everything is on me. He's laying on the sword for the rest of the 11th Street kids. And if you go into the preview for next week's episode and he's in prison, maybe it's Belle Reve, I don't know, but wherever he's at, a list of visitors, and he says, I don't want to see them. Why not? Because I'm the angel of death. And it's like, okay, he's gone into full, self-depression mode. And this is what's leading people to believe he ain't gonna live. This was leading people to believe that Peacemaker Season 2 may actually be the last season of the show, because apparently James Gunn has also made some comments in here. Let's see if we can find the exact comments that James Gunn made with respect to the future of Peacemaker characters. So this is from an interview that James Gunn did with Collider. I'm not a fan of Collider, but it is what it is. He did an interview with Collider, what was this, about a week or so ago. And this was by Therese Laxon, senior TV editor that's been with Collider for the last 4 years. And this was published on September 27th, right? And this was an interview that came out after episode 6 of season 2. And they were talking about, teasing where Peacemaker's story might go after season 2. And the question was asked, are you working on a season 3? Where does the Peacemaker story go from here? And Gunn's quote was, it is not right now. I think that people should, that doesn't mean there aren't plans for these characters, but it's not necessarily season 3 of Peacemaker. And then people should watch episode 8 to see what happens, because maybe some of your questions will be answered in that episode by itself. So, the fact that he said it's not necessarily season 3 of Peacemaker has, of course, given fans, the fandom brain has kicked in and believes, oh, wait, this could be it for Peacemaker. And now you've got people upset by that because they want to see Adebayo and Harcourt and these other characters continue on, and they feel that they deserve a show, they deserve a continued place in the DCU. But then others are saying, well, maybe it won't be Peacemaker. Maybe they'll go off and, be in other things and do other shows, right? Like the Waller series and other stuff like that. And then people, especially after this episode, are going, wait a minute, what are the reason it's not season 3 of Peacemaker is because Peacemaker's not going to live by the time the season is over. What if there's some self-sacrifice? What if he gets taken out? If he believes he's the angel of death and thinks that everyone needs to stay away from him because everybody that he touches dies in that regard, right? What if this leads ultimately to his death and he doesn't go any further than season 2 of this particular show? Hey, entirely possible. And as Gunn said, maybe some of your questions will be answered in episode 8, the season finale. Will it be the series finale? Well, I might find out. We may very well find out. But fandom brain, like that's the thing that I've coined here, the term with respect to the overexcited expectations and hopes that we have for overarching stories like this in that regard. And now we've got one episode left. We've got the final episode of season 2 to go with respect to any cameos and any overarching DCU stuff. More of the stuff that will lead directly into Man of Tomorrow will be in this final episode. It will be 57 minutes long, so Anthony and anybody else that have complaints, if you will, or concerns about runtime for these episodes, we're getting a longer one by at least 20 minutes, right? Is it long enough for you? I don't know. I know that, like, The Boys, if I'm not mistaken, at least a couple of those season finales, at least in the seasons that I've watched, because I'm like a season behind on that show, have been like over an hour, right? Something to that effect, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's all coming down to this, and it seemingly all the Earth X storyline stuff is over, with the possibility, with the exception of Keith, possibly, causing some problems, but who knows if he's going to cause problems in this final episode of this season, or if he's going to be a problem down the road, or if he even shows up again at all. I don't know. Not sure. Just the fact that you lingered on him being alive in that ambulance seems to suggest that he's going to pop up again at some point, but we'll see. We will see. We got one episode left. But no, I most certainly was not disappointed with this week's episode. Great character work, really heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching sequences, and just, again, James Gunn writes character development and he writes heart into his stories. And I have seen that through 3 Guardians films, regardless of what I feel about Volume 2. The heart and the character development is in that movie. If people remember, I did say back in the day when we were still doing Fans Without Borders that even though I didn't really care for that movie, I liked what he did with Yondu and I liked what he did with Nebula, right? And I can't say that there wasn't character development with Star-Lord and others, because there was. I just didn't necessarily care for what was done. And I've softened on that in years, right? I don't hate the movie. I used to hate that movie back in the day. I don't hate it now. It's just I like the first and the third ones much better. And you want to talk about character development, heart. There's tons of that in the first and certainly in the third Guardians of the Galaxy film. Absolutely. And there's plenty of it in Superman. There's plenty of it in the Suicide Squad even, right? With an ensemble cast like that, you got the heartfelt moments with Ratcatcher and Bloodsport and everybody else. Like, there's stuff there. This is what James Gunn does. This is how he tells his stories. His stories at the end of the day are going to be personable. They're going to be personal, and they're going to be focused on his characters, and they're going to be focused on the storytelling surrounding the group of characters that he's telling the story about, not necessarily the overarching world as it is. And it's not that there won't be world-building things, but expecting that a story is going to traverse itself into primarily world-building territory, I think, is a fool's errand with anything that James Gunn writes. And maybe that was different with Creature Commandos. I don't know. I still need to find that the hell out. Crazily enough, I've got one episode left. I need to watch it before. I mean, clearly the G.I. Robot thing's not going to happen. Or maybe it will. I don't know. But damn it, I got to binge through that show before we get to the season finale of Peacemaker here for this particular season. But yeah, there you have it. Peacemaker, episode 2, or season 2, rather, episode 7, A Keith in the Night. Those are my thoughts. Seriously, not disappointed. Did I like episode 6 better? Sure. but episode 7 was still really good. It's a really good penultimate episode. As far as ranking penultimate episodes, like that's a penultimate episode. That's a good episode just before a season finale for sure. And that is going to do it for this particular episode of Flight Box. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Thank you so much for supporting theflightcast.com. Hope that you have enjoyed my musings on Peacemaker Season 2. I've been doing episodes of this show exclusively for that. And we've got one more episode next week to talk about Peacemaker. And then I got to figure out the next TV show that I'm going to talk about on Flight Box after that. But if you have any thoughts with respect to Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 7, A Keith in the Night, or anything else in the realm of movies, TV, and other assorted media that you want to join the feedback circle to talk about, you know where to find me on Threads and Instagram at The Flightcast. You can comment on the posting for this episode on the Flightcast YouTube channel. There's also Flightcast at BLUESKY, where I'm on BLUESKY as well. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great rest of the week, or great weekend, I should say, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.